It's all on Woman's Hour today. But it is the 150th birthday of the Fawcett Society. On the 7th of June 1866, Millicent Fawcett and other campaigners handed over their first women's suffrage petition to Parliament. So 2016 then, and we have record levels of female employment. 29% of MPs are female. We've had one female Prime Minister. The gender pay gap, 19% at the moment. And there are now, of course, many more women than men at university, and it's been that way for a little while in this country. Our guests then are Helen Pankhurst, great-granddaughter of Emmeline and granddaughter of Sylvia, and advisor to the charity Care International. Helen, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yvonne Roberts, the award-winning journalist, writer and broadcaster, is in our studio in Taunton. Morning to you, Yvonne.
Good morning.
Laura Perrins is also here, co-editor of the Conservative Woman website. Welcome to you, Laura.
Morning.
And Layla Hussein, psychotherapist and founder of the Dahlia Project, the first counselling service for FGM survivors. So, Yvonne, I'm going to give this one to you, and you can start us off. Some people believe there have been 4 so-called waves of feminism. Now, what do we mean by that?
At various times, with other social actions taking place as well, women have sort of surged forward. So the wave that I'm mostly, I suppose, connected with, because that was my youth, was the second wave and the third wave, and it started in the 1960s with a commission on women that President Kennedy organised in 1960. Then we had the pill. Then we had all sorts of social actions to do with the anti-Vietnam War and civil rights, and the sheer numbers. And I think sometimes we forget that this was such a fantastic period because there were so many young people finding their voices, finding their feet. Working class women were going to university for the first time, and that sort of led to a general feeling that whatever life was offering women at that time was not sufficient. It was a much simpler time. We didn't have equal pay. We didn't have abortion on demand. We didn't have childcare properly. We were told, I was talking to a friend this morning, and she said in publishing, although she was the oldest and most experienced in her team, she was told that she could only get so far and no further, and that was sort of accepted. So it was a much simpler time. At the turn of the century, 1890s, 1920s, they had fought hard for the vote. Then the 60s came. Then we had the third wave, and I think the fourth wave is bubbling up, and hopefully we'll have the fifth and the sixth to go on.
Well, Helen, take us back then to what happened in 1918 and then in 1928. Now, the suffragists first, then the suffragettes were fighting, yes, for the rights of women to vote, but it wasn't just the right to vote, was it?
No, it wasn't, and I think that it's important to remember the vote, and that was actually what in a way defines that period, and it's what it's remembered for, and the whole parliamentary focus of those times were incredibly important. But there was so much else that was going on that also resonates in terms of the issues today. So around employment and equal pay, around education, the introduction of free universal primary school, but also trying to get women into universities, a whole set of issues around the rights within marriage, so rights of property, the rights to divorce, domestic violence, control over fertility, women's sexuality within marriage, the guardianship of children, the age of marriage, issues around maternal and child health. So a whole set of other issues that were beginning to be argued for then. And I think what defines that first wave, and it is porous and it is possibly not a particularly useful way to be thinking of things because they are so interconnected, but what defines that early period is that it was about protest, about test cases, and it wasn't so much about inclusion within government, which is what happens later.
What we mustn't forget, and we have many male listeners, I should say, nearly half the audience, is that many men did not have the vote in 1918. In fact, millions of men were brought in to the voting community in 1918, weren't they?
That's absolutely right, that the whole women's rights issue in terms of the vote was very much linked to wider suffrage. So in 1918, you have a massive increase in the number of men that can vote, as well as inclusion of women.
So, Laura, what do you see as the lasting impact of suffrage and the suffragettes, and indeed wider feminism?
Well, I think the lasting impact is that it's made women a lot more unhappy. So going back to the Fawcett Society, I mean, you've laid out quite a lot, and you would think, therefore, that people would love to identify as feminists and be very happy about it. But in fact, the Fawcett Society research found this year that only 7% of people identified as feminists. That was from the Fawcett Society themselves. They must have tried to bury that research under a mountain of Birkenstocks.
Well, where did you see it?
It's on their website. So,
well, they're not burying it very successfully, then, are they?
No. But it didn't get the fanfare, perhaps, that it has on a Woman's Hour. Woman's Hour would have buried it, that's for sure. So, and the reason for that is because modern feminism, anyway, these third and fourth waves, is a poisonous ideology that has created a generation of unhappy women and also anxious women, as we found out today. And there's three main points. The first is the destruction of the family, and in particular, the constant undermining of the mother and child bond. The second issue is how it is destroying relations between men and women by constantly attacking men and marriage. And as a result of that, there's actually been a happiness flip since the 1970s. So in the 1970s, women were more likely to be happy than men, but in fact now women are far less likely to describe themselves as happy. So what was it for? And yesterday, finally, reported in both The Guardian and the Daily Mail, is that young women in particular between the 20s and 30s are reporting huge levels of anxiety, and I think are 5 times more likely to be anxious than men. So with all the progress, why aren't you any happier?
OK, well, I mean, people are listening. Of course they are. At BBC Woman's Hour, if you want to take part on Twitter, you can email the programme whenever you like via our website. Layla Hussein, you're somebody, a survivor of FGM. You listened to Laura, you've heard what Helen had to say, and Yvonne. What do you want to throw into the potpourri?
Well, I can clearly see I'm a very proud feminist, and I think following from that comment, and for me, actually, the reason maybe we are seeing more unhappy, angry women, because I think finally we do have the space to be loud and angry. And I think actually we should be very pissed off the way the world is towards women.
We obviously, not everybody will have appreciated the term, although many will, I should say. No, carry on, Layla.
Yes, we should be very annoyed. Yeah, let's rechange that. So for me, in terms of the current wave, I think women, because we women, we have been brought up from a very young age, not to express our feelings, not to be annoyed, not to be mad. I'm from the Somali community, and there's actually a saying where we're told, keep all your feelings in your stomach. As a woman, you do not express your feelings. So for me, actually, where women do actually have the space where they can be angry and express how they feel is absolutely quite important. And I think it's a shame for me as a woman and a mother to a daughter that we still have that we're still having a conversation whether to be ashamed of being what saved me and many women. It's feminism. My grandmother was a feminist, my mother's a feminist, my father was a feminist, and it never broke the family apart. The reason that families break apart has nothing to do with feminism, it's to do with the relationship between those two people.
Laura?
Well, just coming back onto the FGM issue, I mean, Layla, obviously your work is genuinely incredibly important, and I respect it fully. But the horrific practice of FGM is an import into Britain. It's not something that's been native to Britain and has been illegal for at least 20 years here, although arguably I would say it was illegal under the 1861 Act, the Offences Against the Person Act. And the other issue is that if there is FGM going on in Britain, and it is, it's because it's been accommodated by the left and sometimes feminist under the umbrella of moral relativism. It's because the left said, no, all these cultures are the same. Any of their practices, we can't go against that. Let's accommodate it all. And we know now how wrong that was, and that we should have very firm cultural norms such as equality
a quick
between
chance
the
to
sexes.
respond to that, Laura.
Just to clarify, FGM has always existed. It's a global issue. It's not an African issue or Somali issue.
It's never been native to Britain. I mean, there's no evidence for that.
If you let me explain, maybe because obviously I'm an expert in this field.
Because we've got a lot to
in this country, we actually practice something called clidiotomy, where women's clitorises were actually removed because hysteria was considered to be a mental illness. So that's no different than FGM. So just terminology might be different, and I think it's important that we do keep that in mind.
We don't want to focus. FGM, we know, is a horrific practice. It is illegal in this country. And Yvonne, very briefly, if you can. Go on.
I'm really surprised that Laura hasn't blamed feminism, the start of World War II on feminism. It's very easy, isn't it, to opt for criticism of an ideology that has so many enemies anyway. And I would say arguably that a lot of young women today actually have young men who are very different from their fathers and their grandfathers, and that's a plus. And one of the reasons why they feel so anxious and unhappy, it's because the system has failed to change.
Okay.
It's not because
you can't have it both ways. You can't say feminism has been fantastic for women and then on the other hand, but the reason why we're unhappy is it hasn't been fantastic enough.
Helen Pankhurst,
It's
there have
because-
been some people, and I think there is a grain of truth, or there has been a grain of truth in this accusation over the years, that feminists are the middle class, lentil scoffers, scatter cushions, all know each other, all went to Oxford or Cambridge. And there is a grain of truth in that. It is all terribly right on, and some people feel very excluded.
There is a grain of truth in that. The reality is always much more complicated. There is a grain of truth in the fact that some women are angry, and that might be that they are less powerful, etc. So, I mean, it's easy to diss and to dismiss an attempt to change things that are much more complicated than that. So let's just look at that issue of class and the suffragettes. We mentioned earlier the fact that the Suffrage Act of 1918 allowed more men to vote as well as allowing women to vote. So before 1918, if you had had young working class women campaigning for that vote, she would have been campaigning for something that her brothers didn't have. So inevitably it was difficult for a working class woman to be involved in a suffrage campaign if it was a class issue as well. So you had conflict within the suffrage and suffragette movement as to whether this was for all women, whether it was for only those women that were equivalent to the men that had it. And also there was an issue about marriage, whether married women were already counted by their men and therefore shouldn't have the vote. So maybe a question to Laura on that one. I mean, do you feel that married women, you are a married woman, you are a mother, should they have the votes equally with unmarried women? This was a major issue of controversy early on in the century.
Well, there's two issues about the suffragettes. First of all, it was the Conservative Party in 1928 that finally levelled things out, granting the same voting rights to women as men. And the very important point, Helen, just while we're talking about the suffragettes, one of their main, I think, ideas was that women should be allowed to vote in the public sphere because women were morally superior to men, and therefore they would raise the public sphere to that level. But what you've had with the third and particularly the fourth wave feminists now is a sort of Henry Higgins school of feminism, and they've gone the other way. They said, well, why can't women be more like a man? That's the overall.
Absolutely.
That's the overall
Okay.
idea.
Absolutely.
Third and fourth wave feminism.
Yvonne, first of all,
Absolute
Disagree with
rubbish.
that.
The whole point of it. In 1970, Germaine Greer wrote The Female Eunuch, and at the end of it, she said, "The system is broken. What will you do?" And the point of the whole battle for equal rights. This is a human rights issue. They don't want to be more like men. Men too have been subjected to huge conditioning. They want a different kind of system in which men and women equally can have work that is satisfying, paid work that is satisfying, but also be connected to a life outside of work. They don't. That's an endeavour that still requires really, really hard work, and it's nothing to do with being like men.
Helen, very briefly.
Yes, very briefly, feminism isn't a issue of left or right. You can be a feminist and a conservative, you can be a feminist and a socialist. The other point is that it is what's incredibly powerful about the moment we're at now in terms of feminism is that every single individual person can make small statements that make a difference. They can click and make a difference. They can march and make a difference. They can bring up their children, their sons and their daughters equally, and that makes a difference. And men can be feminists as well. It's a wonderful time to be a feminist.
I really want to hear.
Actually call themselves feminists.
Okay, you've said that. I know, Layla, that you would say, other people might disagree, that white feminism hasn't done a lot for black women. What do you say?
I think for me, it wasn't that a lot hasn't been done. I think we were left out from the conversations. I think sometimes, many times, I've ended up in situations where white women who have, middle class background was speaking about my issues, and I felt, why don't we have those spaces? And I think black and Muslim feminists are still having to fight for those positions, and I think it's important when we are discussing these issues that we do remember as great as feminism has been for me, but still we are still left out from certain platforms and certain positions.